Welcome to the Man Cave Podcast with Dan Casper.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to this episode of the Man Cave Podcast, brought to you by our good friends from Hy-Vee and Toyson Ford. Also, don't forget to check out the Swag Cave, brought to you by Residence Branding Company, the official swag provider for the podcast. That link is in the podcast description. We're going to talk some college football, specifically Wisconsin Badger college football. Looking back at the past couple of weeks and looking ahead to their big game coming up against Alabama this week. And Colten Bartholomew, Badger football reporter, is going to be joining me here in just a second. But we're going to be talking about, again, his thoughts on what he has seen from this Badger football team the first couple weeks. Are they holding anything back from their playbook? And then looking ahead to the matchup against Alabama. So, without further ado, joining us now is Badger football beat reporter for Badger Extra, Wisconsin State Journal, and Madison.com, Colten Bartholomew. You can subscribe to his amazing work at badgerextra.com/subscribe. Colten, big thanks again for joining us here this morning.
Yeah, anytime, Dan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so, hey, Colten, before we get to, obviously, the big game coming up here with Alabama coming to Madison, you know, the first couple of weeks in, Badgers are 2-0, but some fans that have chimed into our program maybe a little concerned with what they have seen. Some are wondering, have they been holding back from their playbook? What's kind of been your analysis from what you saw from this team in the first 2 weeks?
Yeah, I definitely think that they were holding things back, and then they didn't show a lot of what we saw throughout even spring football and then during training camp in particular. And some of the things that you can point out really quickly are, you know, a lot of the RPO work. You know, we saw one RPO play that went for a touchdown, that C.J. Williams play that he ends up coming up wide open down the sideline. That was an RPO that we had seen during training camp and then hadn't seen in week one. But I think they've kept a lot of that stuff in their back pocket, particularly some of the deeper throws that are, I think, Tyler Van Dyke's greatest strength, and the reason that he is the starting quarterback for the Badgers is what he can add as a deep ball thrower. So I think you're going to see a more expanded playbook here on Saturday against Alabama, and I think you're going to see Wisconsin start to open things up a little bit. How much that matters, I don't know. There's a significant talent gap on this team, or between these two teams. But I do think that you're going to see a little bit more creativity, a little bit more of what this offense should be. And then I think just from a bigger picture for this rest of the season, that's what this offense has to move toward. I don't think you're going to win any of these games that are going to be the really determining points of your season if you play the kind of conservative offensive football that they had in the first 2 weeks.
For fans who may have only seen Tyler Van Dyke for the first couple of games, and for you who has covered the team throughout the all offseason, spring practice, and training camp, what type of quarterback is he that maybe we haven't quite seen yet in these first couple games?
Yeah, he's definitely a better deep ball thrower than just about anything. I mean, he's pretty accurate, I would say, between that 12 to 17 yard intermediate range, and that's something that Wisconsin really needs because some of those out routes and some of the corner passes that they ask, from one hash to the other sideline that are really tough passes, he's able to make. He's got the arm strength, he's got the accuracy. But I think the biggest separator for him is going to be those deep balls, and that's something that you're going to have to see a lot more and a lot more chances with. I think Van Dyke said it Tuesday that the only way you can create some of those big plays down the field is like taking chances with them, and I think he was pretty maybe limited or safe about not taking too many of those. There are a couple of, going back and watching the South Dakota game a few times like I have, there are a few times that South Dakota's corners are press man coverage, and guys like C.J. Williams or Bryson Green beat it almost immediately off the line of scrimmage, and they're open down the field, and then either he missed it or just decided not to take that chance at that point. And I think that's going to change that because I think I asked Van Dyke the question, like, are you excited to kind of get some of these, governors off this offense because it's clearly how they've been playing? And he said, oh, yeah, like we've got a lot of stuff that we worked on a lot that we've been itching to get out. So I think those are the things that Van Dyke probably excels at the best. He came to Wisconsin in large reason because of the Phil Longo air raid style. That's what he had the most success with when he was down at Miami, a little bit more fast-paced and, leaning on that pass game to kind of set everything up for you. So obviously Longo does a little bit different than traditional air raid, but I think that's what you're going to see out of Van Dyke, and that's what he wants to do, and that's why he's here. So I think there's going to be even though I don't know how Saturday's going to go, I feel like it's probably going to be tough regardless of whatever plays Wisconsin calls. I think there's going to be a little sigh of relief from fans seeing that the offense is at least going to be attempting to get the ball down the field a little bit more.
How concerned should we be with maybe like the defensive line play and stopping the run with this defense?
Yeah, I would say fairly concerned because obviously the defensive line lost their best player in training camp with James Thompson going down with a torn pec, but I haven't been too impressed with what we've seen out of that line outside of Elijah Hills, one of the transfers that they brought in, and particularly as a pass rusher for Hills. He's done a pretty good job, but I think they've just been inconsistent with the following their rules. You see guys trying to make plays and trying to, jump gaps and do things that are just a little bit out of the norm of what you're expecting from Wisconsin defense, where discipline's always been kind of a hallmark. And when those things happen, either it's a tackle for loss and the guy makes a good guess and makes a play, or like we've seen in the first 2 weeks, you're letting up some pretty big chunks because you're not in position. So I think that's one thing that Wisconsin's front really has to do a better job of, is staying in their gaps, staying sound with their rules, and letting the linebackers get to the ball. And then the linebackers have to do a better job of using proper pursuit angles, because they've been over pursuing quite a bit and getting out of position in that way. So we'll see a little bit of a shakeup with that linebacker core here on Saturday, with Jake Chaney being suspended for that first half because of a targeting call last week. Tackett Curtis will step in for him. He's a transfer from USC. A little bit more speed, maybe a little bit less thump than we've seen out of Chaney in the first couple of weeks, but maybe that helps in that pursuit like I was talking about before. So I think this linebacker core has to, again, be more sound, but then has to try to make some more impact plays. And, this defense really hasn't created a turnover outside of the late kind of throwing up pass in the first week by Western Michigan with Xavier Lucas. So that's another big focus for this defense. So, again, tough week to say you're going to start forcing turnovers against Alabama, but I know that's the goal of theirs going into Saturday.
Talking with Colten Bartholomew, Badger football beat reporter for Badger Extra, Wisconsin State Journal, Masson.com. You can subscribe to Badger Extra by visiting badgerextra.com/subscribe. And I read your piece, too, where you go back and kind of rehash the 1928 game, the last time Alabama came to Wisconsin. How cool was that to kind of go back in history and read up about that game back almost 100 years ago now?
Yeah, it's pretty wild. You just talk about, as you're reading through the stories, just for me, in my perspective, is how coverage of football has changed. It's almost every single play gets a sentence. But then also the way football is played, the Badgers quarterback was the running back 2 weeks prior to that. They moved him there just to try to use him in the option plays, and they completed one pass, and it happened to be to the guy playing quarterback, and a little bit of a trick play, a little toss pass. So, yeah, there's a different style of football, different kind of world of football, but the things that were consistent were Alabama was considered one of the best teams in the country, and it was a big upset for Wisconsin, and then you see just the importance that football had to this community and to Wisconsin as a whole, front page of the massive, at the time, Wisconsin State Journal and things like that. So, definitely fun to go back and look at some of those things.
If Wisconsin can pull this off, I mean, it's the easy question, where would this rank, in Badger football history and such? But, man, I can't imagine what that environment's going to be like. I know you're going to be there covering the game, but, I mean, this would have to be one of the biggest moments at Camp Randall if they could pull this off, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you put it right there with, back in the 60s, that Rose Bowl they played against USC that kind of put on the map for a while there. The 2010 against Ohio State when Ohio State was number one. I mean, even that one, I would put this game over that if Wisconsin were able to do this, because at least that Wisconsin team back in 2010 was ranked at that time. They were thought of as a pretty good team already. Wisconsin's current team doesn't quite have that designation around the country at the moment. So it would be right there in terms of the best wins in Wisconsin history, and particularly at Camp Randall. It's going to take a lot of things breaking their way. It's going to take multiple turnovers, I think, by Alabama. It's going to take some things, special teams play, whatever it is, kind of just one extra thing kind of bouncing towards Wisconsin's favor. That because I just don't think if you play this game straight up and don't get those kind of bounces, that Wisconsin's got the talent or the consistency on either side of the ball yet to really say that they're going to compete in a normal game. But if they can make some things abnormal, that would be their chance, in my opinion.
You kind of answered my next question for you, but I was going to ask you to kind of fill in a blank. Wisconsin wins this game if they do what? You kind of mentioned a couple other things. Would there be something else that maybe you would add to that?
Yeah, I think they've got to put the game in Van Dyke's hands, because when you look at Alabama's defense, they've got a lot of talent. They're always going to, or I guess I should say they have in the last 20 years. They consistently have some of the best defensive talent in the country. But when you look at the games that they've lost, it's only like 25 or 30 in 20 years. But when you look at the games they've lost, it's been because of the quarterback played, an excellent game. And that's what you're going to need out of Tyler Van Dyke. I don't think you're winning this game if Ches Maluzzi, Cade Yakimelli, and whoever else plays in the backfield is kind of the feature of the offense. I haven't seen enough of those guys to say that they're going to be explosive enough to take on an Alabama team playing that way. I really do think it's going to come down to Van Dyke getting the ball down the field, challenging Alabama's defense in a way that they haven't been challenged the first 2 weeks. And obviously, anytime we're talking about deep passing, that comes back to the offensive line's got to protect and allow those routes to get downfield and the quarterback to have time. But you're going to need to see the best game, I think, of Tyler Van Dyke's career. You look back at the Miami days, he had some huge games, had some success even when, the talent around him wasn't great. So you're going to need to get that kind of version of him. And it all kind of, to me, goes back to you need that's why you bring a guy like Van Dyke in, right? You need somebody that's going to elevate your offense beyond its talent and play to that level. And we're going to find out if Van Dyke can do that here in his third game in Wisconsin.
We know Wisconsin, before the season started, this was going to be a very difficult schedule. Alabama, USC after their bye week next week. Penn State's on there. Now Nebraska's in the top 25, Oregon. If Wisconsin does pull this off and they get this victory, how much does it change the expectations for the rest of this season for the Badgers?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if they're able to pull this off, and assuming it's like, not something entirely fluky, but if they pull it off, then, yeah, you start looking at it. It's like, okay, well, then if they can beat Alabama, they can beat anybody else on their schedule. You look at, they've got Oregon and Penn State on the schedule coming up. USC is obviously a very tough game after a bye week following this Alabama game. So I think we'll know by the end of the month, like, kind of where Wisconsin's expectations should be the rest of the year. Like, should this be hey, take care of business and continue winning, particularly at home, and maybe you're challenging for a playoff spot in December? Or is it, all right, survive and try to figure out where you're at if you can make a bowl game? Because I think if it's really lopsided on Saturday, I don't think it's unreasonable for fans to question if the bowl streak is going to continue, because you look at the rest of the schedule, four more teams currently ranked out of the last 9 opponents. And then, some unranked games right now, like Nebraska, that looks pretty tough on the road. And then, anything can happen that last week against Minnesota. So I think, Wisconsin's got to, if they don't win on Saturday, they've got to at least keep it competitive for, the sky not to fall here down in Madison.
Last question for you, just kind of a Big Ten question overall. Which of these two teams maybe has impressed you the most with how they've started off the season? Illinois coming off their win against Kansas, 2-0, or Nebraska now in the top 25 after beating Colorado last week?
I'm going to have to go with Nebraska just because I think Illinois had already shown a couple of years ago that they were starting that trajectory up. And then they took a little bit of a step back last year. I think there was some misfires in recruiting and some playing time stuff that were going on for the Illini. But I think Nebraska starting to show that they've put things together. And, the thing about Nebraska for the last, 10, 15 years has been they continued to recruit fairly well. Nationally, they're always in that top 25 range. It just hasn't put the pieces together with the scheme and the talent they've had. You're starting to see that happen with Matt Rule and his coaching staff there right now. And then obviously Raiola as a freshman, he's rolling right now. That's always one of those things where you're looking and it's like, okay, if he continues it, then you're talking about a really special guy. If he hits a speed bump, then it's like, all right, yeah, he's a freshman and things like that are going to happen. So I'll lean Nebraska there, and not to discredit Illinois, but I just think Nebraska's been a little bit more impressive. And then I'm excited to see what they do coming up, because I know they've got some of their big games. Obviously, Colorado was a hyped one, but I think some of their better teams are coming up for the Cornhuskers, and I'm excited to see what they look like.
He's Colten Bartholomew, Badger football beat reporter for Badger Extra, Wisconsin State Journal, Masson.com. You can subscribe to Badger Extra by visiting badgerextra.com/subscribe. Also check out the latest podcast, the Badger Extra podcast over there. And a big thanks to Colten for joining us on this episode of the Man Cave Podcast. Don't forget to follow and subscribe to the Man Cave Podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts, like Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. We're up over there too. So that way you never miss an episode, because sometimes we'll drop a few episodes all at once. All right. Till next time, I'm Dan Casper, and I will talk to you on the next episode of the Man Cave Podcast.